Hi, I'm Rodney Johnson, co-editor of Boom and Bust as well as Economy and Markets. In the 1980s, Saudi Arabia had a problem. Energy demand was weak and the kingdom had just brought a lot of supply online. The combination led to falling energy prices, which meant less money for the country. In response, Saudi Arabia cut output, hoping the drop in supply would send prices higher. The only problem is that the other oil-producing nations didn't exactly toe the line. Instead, they kept pumping, which meant that these other producers were effectively taking market share from the Saudis, even as prices remained low. Now, that's kind of like losing twice. This time around, when we have low prices right now, the Saudis aren't taking the bait. The country did cut oil production by about 5% in August, and just a touch more in September, but they haven't made dramatic shifts in output. As energy prices have kept falling in the face of rising supply and sluggish world demand, they appear to be comfortable with the current pricing of energy through the rest of the year. There's no question that Saudi Arabia will lose revenue due to lower prices, but they aren't willing to risk market share, which is much harder to get back. Now, all this is great news to consumers and businesses because we've actually engaged in the biggest wealth transfer in the history of the world over the last 40 years as we bought oil from the Middle East. Falling prices, particularly near the holidays in Western nations and as winter approaches in the Northern Hemisphere, is a welcome relief to budgets large and small. But chances are the Saudis aren't doing this because they're the good guys. Instead, they're probably hoping to be the last man standing on two different fronts, by squeezing other countries that need higher oil prices to balance their budgets and by rendering high-priced energy production unprofitable. Now, many of the large Middle Eastern countries and African members of OPEC need oil above $90 a barrel to balance their budgets. This includes Saudi Arabia, but that country has a lot of wealth it can draw on and a very strong relationship with the U.S. Other countries, like Iran, aren't as well off. While Saudi Arabia needs the price of oil to remain at $90 per barrel or above to balance their budget, the Iranians need the price of oil to reach $140 before they balance their budget. Watching the price of oil go the other way has to be painful for Iran, which is probably very satisfying to Saudi Arabia, since the two countries are longtime adversaries. Saudi Arabia is Arabian and mostly Sunni, whereas Iran is Persian and mostly Shiite. This has led to proxy battles in places like Lebanon and Iraq, as well as fights in business. At the same time, Saudi Arabia is causing pain for its oil for Iran. It's also putting pressure on competitors that have high-priced production prices, like the upstart fracking industry here in the U.S. and the tar sands producers in Canada. Now, traditional barrels of oil from the shallow waters of the Gulf of Mexico or the Permian Basin in Texas are pretty cheap, much less than $90 a barrel. But this is pretty close to break even for a lot of the new producers. If prices drop much below $85 or even $80 a barrel, it's possible that a lot of the new oil producers will have to cut back on production dramatically because it just won't be profitable. Now, this suits Saudi Arabia just fine because it means less competition in the future. Even if or when prices go back up, it takes time to ramp back up oil production. You have to get transportation back and refining and everything, so the Saudis will have gained an advantage. Now, while Americans will be thrilled with cheaper gas and heating oil, any drop in energy prices do hurt the economy through the jobs market. Think about what the boom in the oil industry has done for the U.S. since the financial crisis. If we take the employment gains in Texas over the past 6 years out of the equation, then the employment levels in the U.S. would still be below what we had in 2008. Is cheaper gas worth the loss of jobs? That's a really good question that unfortunately doesn't have a very easy answer.